From the outside, Palmer Luckey's trailer looked absolutely ordinary. Tinted windows, fiberglass shell, and a corrugated, once white siding that had faded to beige. But inside, from end to end, it had been modified to fit his own desires. The first thing to go was the bathroom. It just simply took up too much space, he reasoned. He didn't need a specific area devoted to preparing meals when his entire diet, more or less, consisted of frozen burritos. When neighbors passed Lucky's trailer, they would invariably feel a twinge of sadness, a guttural pinch of how could this be? What had become of that kid with all that promise, that bright, bubbly, homeschooled boy who had started taking college courses when he was only 15? That is an excerpt from the book The History of the Future by Blake J. Harris, and it was published in 2020. And it is the story of the founding of Oculus VR and is centered on the inventor, founder, Palmer Luckey, but it also follows all of the other events and people that were involved in bringing Oculus to life. It follows Palmer all the way from the founding of the company as a teenager to the sale of Facebook, all the way to Palmer's ultimate firing, and ends with the beginnings of a new stealth startup that has made Palmer even more famous than before. So Palmer is born on September 19th, 1992 in Long Beach, California, and he is raised by a stay-at-home mother, and his father sells cars, and he's homeschooled. Palmer describes his schooling in the book as, "I was homeschooled for most of my life." "That's awesome," Mitchell said. "Was it by yourself or with siblings?" "Let's see," Luckey said, running through the chronology in his mind. "It was my sisters for a lot of it, but they ended up going to a private high school. A lot of it wasn't my mom teaching me. There's a lot of basically self-driven learning courses. I was mostly doing it myself. But it only works if you're a certain type of person. Like my sisters were not into that. They were not self-motivated or self-driven, so they couldn't keep up the work and with the testing. So they had to go to the school system, and I was lucky enough to escape that." So potentially in part because of this freedom, Palmer early on becomes obsessed with technology and science fiction, and these interests culminate and ultimately lead him on an adventure where he creates the first commercially viable VR headset and system. Jumping back into the book, where Palmer's obsession leads him to reach out to an academic who was one of the leading voices in VR at the time. "Hi," Luckey wrote, reaching out in June 2011. "I'm a huge fan of your work, and as someone who loves the concepts behind VR and AR technologies, I greatly respect your contributions to the field. I have been wanting to get in touch with you for a while. There are a few things I wanted to talk to you about. I would love a paid or unpaid internship at somewhere where I could get some experience. If there's anything you can do to help me out or point me in the right direction, I would greatly appreciate it." So this is basically the playbook for success if you're a young person. Be passionate about something, get super interested in it, and then learn everything you possibly can. Then humbly and honestly reach out to the people doing what you want to do and learn from their expertise and about them personally. So through this intense passion and interest in VR, Palmer starts multiple websites and forums where he basically talks about the things that he's interested in, which is prototypes of portable video game consoles and eventually VR with other like-minded quote unquote nerds. And through one of these forums, he is connected with John Carmack, who is a video game and programming legend. He is the creator of one of the most famous video games of all time, Doom, and founded id Software, which is a game development studio, in 1991 at the age of 20. And so John Carmack becomes interested in learning more about VR. And even as a teenager, Palmer is considered one of the leading voices in VR because of his contributions on these forums and websites. And this is why John Carmack is eventually connected with him. So Carmack asked Palmer to send him one of his early prototypes, and Carmack actually ends up bringing this prototype to the 2012 E3 gaming conference on behalf of ZeniMax. And so this is like, when E3 was still a thing, it was like the pinnacle of gaming. It was what everyone looked forward to in the summer. It's where the entire industry came together and everyone found out what was new in video games. So it's huge that one of the legends in video games goes to one of the most important gaming conferences of the year and brings his prototype. And early on, they don't actually plan for this to be a big thing. John Carmack is supposed to, quote, show it to a handful of people. So Carmack technically works for ZeniMax because it was acquired. id Software was acquired by ZeniMax, and so he is bringing it on behalf of ZeniMax. When he's there, he ends up showing it to more people than previously expected, and it gets amazing reviews and becomes actually one of the highlights of the entire conference, despite the lack of formality of any agreement or even a company prior to Palmer sending him the headset. So this is what becomes the catalyst for Oculus becoming a real thing. For what to name this little entity, he recalled the conversation from a few months earlier in which he was chatting with his colleagues at ICT. ICT is the research center where he reached out to the academic. He actually ended up getting a job there. One of the researchers offhandedly mentioned that he had been peering through the Oculus. When asked what an Oculus was, the researcher explained that it simply meant a round window, any round window or opening. Unfortunately, virtual reality has risen and fallen many times, with a lot more emphasis on the latter portion. The tech has never gotten far enough to be truly convincing, and great hardware has been far out of reach for the average person until now. Oculus is my tilt at trying to change that. The tech has improved, and we can build hardware and software that is better, stronger, and faster than the old guard, companies that create niche, wildly expensive products. Don't get me wrong, these companies are important, and they have to solve some very tough engineering challenges to satisfy their customers. But the reality is that as gamers and dreamers, we have a different set of challenges to meet. Massive field of view to engulf your visual senses, low latency tracking to maximize presence, lightweight and comfortable for long-term use, and perhaps most importantly, price measured in the hundreds of dollars, not tens of thousands. I have worked long and hard with a lot of brilliant people to try to meet those challenges, and now it is time to put it in your hands. So all of that hype from E3 2012 and the association with video game legend John Carmack leads Palmer to have two amazing opportunities. The first is Sony, who is interested in getting into the VR business, offers Palmer a job to work on VR. The initial starting salary is $70,000, and that ends up getting increased to $140,000, which is a lot in 2012 dollars, especially for a 20-year-old with no college degree. And the second is with a group of founders, investors, and entrepreneurs led by Brendan Iribe, who very clearly sees what Oculus can be and is passionate about helping Palmer get it there. And while not a perfect comparison, their relationship ends up taking on a Jobs-Wozniak semblance, with Woz being the inventor behind Apple computers, similar to how Palmer is the inventor of Oculus, and Jobs being the business side of things, the unrelenting force that wills Apple into existence, is more similar to Brendan Iribe in this relationship. Again, not a perfect comparison, but Brendan Iribe is the investor, venture capitalist, former founder and entrepreneur who sees the kernel of what this can be and takes it from a small Kickstarter project to something that can be commercially viable. Guys, Iribe said, but he didn't finish the sentence right away. He couldn't. His mind was bursting with grand and jagged thoughts. He bought himself a few seconds by walking across the room to turn the lights back on. Guys, he said again, do you have any idea how huge this is going to be? I see many challenges, Antonov said, but it is very compelling. And if it is compelling, then it is worth doing. Oh man, Mitchell said, still in some sort of what just happened daze. I cannot even begin to express how thrilled I am to take this to the next level. Agreed, Iribe said. Let's go build a company that changes the world. By the time Luckey got back to his trailer, he was already brainstorming ways to turn down Sony. Iribe and his crew had convinced him that he needed to see things through with Oculus. Now to one of perhaps the most important person in Palmer's life at this time and to this day, and her reaction to all of this. I am so happy for you, Luckey's girlfriend, Nicole Edelman, said later that night as the two of them gazed up from the beach, watching fireworks shoot off. Bursts of red, white, and blue electrified the sky. So what happens next? So much, Lucky replied, his eyes glowing with patriotism. But the number one thing for right now is to ramp up a Kickstarter campaign. We're going to launch it on August 1st. As the fireworks grew even bigger and louder, Lucky put aside his thoughts about Oculus. No point in thinking about virtual reality when the one you've got in front of you is so damn good. And it was. She was. All of it was. God bless America, Lucky thought. God bless this wonderful country of ours. So Palmer met Nicole Edelman, who is his girlfriend at this time, in 2009 at debate camp at the age of 17. He was an unusual guy, this Palmer Luckey, and she liked this very much about him. I am the ground and he's the atmosphere, she would say, to explain their relationship. We need each other. Edelman didn't necessarily expect that Lucky's VR obsession would lead to anything, but she admired all the hard work he put in because one of the things she liked most about him was how, in an increasingly cynical, superficial, and shortcut-driven world, he seemed to be one of the few who still believed in the American dream. Central to that was his underlying ethos: don't complain about it, do something about it. Now, within a month, Palmer and the Oculus team get introductions with the two major game engine developers, Unity and Epic. Unity is located in Copenhagen and focused on more indie developers at a cheaper cost, and Epic, being led by Tim Sweeney, also a video game legend, is more of the gold standard in game development, but is more expensive. They instantly get endorsements from both of them within an hour of meeting with them, and it's really obvious at this point in time that critical mass is starting to be reached prior to the Kickstarter release, and it feels like lightning in a bottle, which Iribe and Mitchell celebrated that evening at a party, sneaking off to not so subtly check their phones, refreshing for last-minute Kickstarter pledges until finally, with a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown to midnight, the guys clinked together their champagne glasses. $2,437,429. That was the final tally, nearly 10 times their fundraising goal. And into September, the momentum kept building. So Kickstarter fundamentally is a platform to raise money for a project or a company or a product. It allows the community, people interested in bringing something to life, to essentially donate to it, to fund it, so that people can use that money to build the thing, and then once they build the thing, they deliver the thing to people. And so they set an original goal of 250,000 to build the early prototype units and ship it to the first consumers. And it's clear they have lightning in a bottle when their fund, their Kickstarter release, raises almost $2.5 million. So now at this point, things are becoming very real. It's clear that Oculus is poised to disrupt the video game industry. It has the backing and interest of major game engine developers. It is associated with John Carmack. It just raised $2.5 million on Kickstarter. And the book includes the initial cap table when they're raising money from VCs after the Kickstarter, and it has shares set aside for seed funding, the board, options, etc., like very normal stuff. And given that ownership breakdown of the cap table, Palmer and Iribe own 16% at this point in time. And some of the first hires that the book talks about and includes are given 1%. And there's going to be dilution and things are going to change between now and when they're acquired. But assuming no other dilution, that these percentages held, these early hires, even with 1% of the company, would net over $20 million when Oculus ultimately sells to Facebook, which is absolutely insane and demonstrates the economics of startups and the importance of getting in early. And then Palmer and Brendan's 16% is in the hundreds of millions. Here's a great early anecdote of why startups are often able to disrupt industries run by big companies, as Oculus has been able to so far in the video game industry. Fundamentally, they're able and willing to do things that big publicly traded companies can't. Luckey and Dykus. Dykus is one of Palmer's best friends from Mod Retro and the forums that he created prior to Oculus, and was the first hire. Luckey and Dicus were at the office trying to determine the ideal eye relief settings, the ideal distance between lens and eyeball that ought to be implemented into the eye cups of DK1 for manufacturing. DK1 is their first prototype. At a normal company, this would all be calibrated with some sort of fancy computer vision system. But this being a startup, always short on time and money, they needed a faster and cheaper solution. Chris, I got it, Luckey shouted minutes earlier. We're going to drill a hole in the center of the lens and then run a flat top screw through the opening so it's jutting out. You know, we'll start it out at a safe distance and then just keep rotating the screw until basically it ever so slightly pokes us in the eye. So basically what he's saying is we're going to screw into the headset until it hits us in the eye, and then we'll measure that screw, and that's how we'll know. So Oculus continues to gain momentum, and in January 2013 at CES, which is the Consumer Electronics Show, they get more amazing feedback. IGN, it's immersion on an entirely different level. TechCrunch, it seems like something that you see in science fiction. Wired, you feel as if you're in another world in a way that's never been possible before. Tom's Hardware, holy shit. Continuing here, Luckey wasn't one to wax nostalgia, but the whirlwind of positive press had nudged him toward reflection. It is nuts, Luckey agreed. When I was younger, my grandpa used to drop off a huge bag every week, completely full of magazines. They weren't all tech magazines, but he's the one who introduced me to Wired and Popular Mechanics and all that other stuff. My grandpa would say that reading that stuff was a small investment to be an informed man. I didn't read them all every week, but a lot of them I did read through. Check us out, Luckey said, showing Dicus an eBay page littered with results. Skimming the items, Dicus couldn't help but grin. Oculus Rift DK1s were $300 on the Kickstarter. Dev kits were in such high demand that some were going for over $1,000. By this point, the first week of April, it was now clear that the launch of DK1 had been an unmitigated success. Secondhand units were selling for 3 times their price, tech journalists were publishing glowing reviews, and Luckey's inbox was flooded with affection and admiration. Now, people beyond the game industry are starting to notice Oculus, and this is only heightened when Carmack leaves ZeniMax to join Oculus full-time, which is a huge indicator that this is something real. Carmack soon sought to expand his role at Oculus to formally leave id Software, turning down enticing offers from Valve and SpaceX to go all in. So joining Oculus as CTO and turning down SpaceX at its current valuation post IPO at this point in time in 2012 or 2013 probably represented what is now $100+ million loss, but perhaps more than that was gained after the Oculus acquisition. It's unknown what Carmack's stake was in the company when he did join. Regardless, though, 2 absolutely amazing options for someone who's clearly brilliant. So the continued hype surrounding Oculus puts them in the sights of perhaps one of the most famous and successful venture capital firms, which ultimately sets a series of events in motion that leads to their acquisition. We are right at the edge where we can bring you no motion sickness content. Naturally, these words stoked the interest of game execs, developers, and reporters on hand. Over the next 24 hours, stories like Oculus, motion sickness is solved by IGN, and CEO promises Oculus Rift won't make you sick from Forbes spread throughout the tech community. This was great, exactly what iRibe had hoped would happen. But even better than those stories going live was what happened as soon as iRibe stepped off the stage and turned on his phone. He received a message from Brian Cho, one of the partners at Andreessen Horowitz. Cho had been at the summit and was intrigued by iRibe's talk. If motion sickness really had been solved, then perhaps Andreessen Horowitz could play a role in Oculus's Series B. This was music to iRibe's ears. He had wanted to be in business with Mark Andreessen since the start of Oculus. Mark Andreessen, Chris Dixon, Brian Cho, and a 4th partner visited Irvine and left telling iRibe, "We are fully converted believers." So much so that on November 5th, Andreessen even emailed an old friend, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, to ask, "Have you seen Oculus?" Assuming not, Andreessen then proceeded to tell Zuckerberg about what he had just experienced. "Blew my brain wide open," he said. I wanted to just give all my money to him on the spot. It's rare that a firm would pass on a Series A opportunity and then later participate in future rounds of funding. But Dixon, who managed the relationship, told Irib he wanted to correct that mistake. He and his partners wanted to do so in a big way, leading a $75 million Series B. Irib wanted more insight into what had changed their mind about Oculus. Part of the answer had to do with a phrase Dixon coined, the bat signal effect. The way I think about it is like this, Dixon began. Let's just take Elon Musk. There were all these people around the world who wanted to build electric cars. For example, there was some smart MIT grad who was working in the innovation group at Ford, whose dream was to work on electric cars. And the only place to do it prior to Tesla was to work at a regular car company in some back room. They don't really take the project seriously. And then maybe you see this person, Elon Musk, is starting this company and you're intrigued, but you're not sure where it's going. And then maybe you see they sold some cars or raised some money or recruited some talented person, and you realize that the sort of bat signal goes out. And they realize, all right, this is going to happen. My dream is going to happen. And then all these people come out of the woodwork and you become this company. And this company becomes kind of this talent magnet for these people, this sort of latent body of talent out there. It's not as if SpaceX and Tesla created all these great space engineers and electrical engineers. They were just on the sidelines. They just weren't the protagonists, right? It took these entrepreneurs to come out and unlock that. I think that this is a lot of what happened with Oculus. So now that Oculus has attracted one of the most famous and successful VCs, a series of events that lead to their acquisition within a matter of months begins. And it all started with Mark Andreessen himself texting Zuck and raving about Oculus. Andreessen is obviously very close to Zuckerberg because Andreessen and Horowitz was one of the early investors in Facebook. We're partnering with Facebook, Irib announced. Facebook? Wait, what? And what exactly did partnering mean? It means we're selling to Facebook, Luckey blurted, and we're all going to be rich. Once everyone had digested the news, after hearing the sale price, calculated what this news meant to them, Irib, Mitchell, and Luckey expressed their excitement and explained what made Facebook the ideal partner to execute Oculus's long-term mission. This is a truly special moment, Irib continued. The work we've done has captured the world's attention and changed the perception of the medium forever. Congratulations, guys. Now let's go get back to changing the world. But before everyone could attempt that, Irib introduced Mark Zuckerberg, who emerged from just outside the kitchen and raved about what Oculus had built. While Luckey checked his phone, greeted by a slew of death threats, FUs, and what seemed to be the outlier, congratulatory words, across the room, Irib also checked his. As he responded to some family and friends, including one friend who had asked him what it felt like to make $2 billion, he replied, "It will leak soon that the deal was actually $3 billion to the founders, and I'll probably burn in hell for this, but it was $4 billion for me." So after being founded in April of 2012, Oculus was sold to Facebook in March 2014, just 2 short years later. Palmer was 21 years old at the time and is now worth close to $1 billion at an age when most kids haven't even graduated from college or had their first real job. In an email from one of the early employees to Palmer at the time congratulating him, he says, "It takes many people to make something like this happen. However, I just want to make sure that I tell you that I am the happiest for you. One person had to have that vision as to how this could all come together and the guts to do whatever it took to make it happen, and that person was you. More so than anyone, you made this dream become a reality, and you changed the lives of almost 100 people forever. I'll never forget your story, and this is how legends are built in life. This isn't the greatest thing you'll ever do, but it is one great thing you did. Congrats, and make sure you finish the job at Facebook." But everyone is not universally pleased with the acquisition, and ironically, the acquisition itself begins another chain of events that lead to Palmer ultimately being fired. But first, back to ZeniMax and Carmack in the early days. ZeniMax CFO was also thinking about Facebook's acquisition of Oculus. Facebook just bought Oculus for $2 billion in cash and stock. Unbelievable, she wrote to ZeniMax COO. And to think, she finished by saying, "This could have been a part of ZeniMax had we played our cards differently. If only ZeniMax had been willing to invest $6 million, they could have had 15% of Oculus. If only they had been willing to let Carmack serve as technical advisor and take that 2% stake in Oculus for free. This ended up being a mistake in the hundreds of millions of dollars, on top of really missing out on VR. Because at the time, a lot of people even thought that ZeniMax was the creator of Oculus, because Carmack brought this to E3 in 2012. They just assumed that he created it and then it was a product of ZeniMax's, and ZeniMax ultimately ends up missing out on it completely. And I won't discuss it much, but they end up bringing a lawsuit against Oculus and Facebook to try to claim that Oculus stole some of their technology. So the next couple excerpts may seem a bit out of context, but they're critical foreshadowing for what happens next and what ultimately leads to Palmer being fired. On April 7th, a whole new backlash began. Initially, it had absolutely nothing to do with Oculus, but rather that some online people were mad that 6 years earlier, Mozilla's new CEO, Brendan Eich, had donated $1,000 to an organization that had been against Prop 8 in California, which effectively banned same-sex marriage. John Carmack supported Brendan Eich that he didn't back down or cater to the mob. Any response to one of their employees adding concern regarding John Carmack's position. Palmer responded, "We don't control what employees say on their own time. We're not going to become one of those megacorps that fire people for having opinions contrary to those of the public or the company. There's no way I would limit my own public communication to technology. But I should be at Oculus for a very, very long time. If the king does not lead, how can you expect his subordinates to follow?" And then on May 1st, Steve and Allison Spinner hosted a small fundraiser for Hillary Clinton in Silicon Valley, who had earlier announced that she was going to be running for president in the 2016 election. Their campaign chair, John Podesta, who would be speaking that day, was advised that there would be 4 important individuals within tech in the room. Box, CTO of Cisco and CEO of 23andMe and spouse of Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google, and Palmer Luckey, founder of Oculus VR. Luckey had concerns about Clinton based on her platform in the 2008 presidential race, but figured this would be a good opportunity to find out if any of her positions had changed. In particular, he was curious about ethanol subsidies, so he asked John Podesta if Mrs. Clinton planned to continue supporting the ethanol blending mandate, because in Luckey's opinion, those subsidies should go towards useful tech that needs it. Podesta thanked Luckey for the question and said that the Clinton campaign had not yet developed its position on ethanol subsidies, and they wanted help from smart people in Silicon Valley in developing it. A few weeks later, in an op-ed for the Iowa caucuses, Hillary Clinton reaffirmed her support for the federal ethanol mandate. So fundamentally here, Palmer, I think, is trying to be open-minded and to evaluate the different candidates. But he is disagreeing with the federal ethanol mandate on the grounds of free markets, that the mandate to use ethanol in renewable fuels props up an industry and is a form of government welfare that does not ultimately solve for the most efficient or effective fuel. And the reason people advocate for this mandate is to support corn growers and producers. It's understandable because it bolsters the price of their crops. And it's really a difficult conversation because farmers don't make a lot of money to begin with. And so people are trying to support American farmers, but the subsidies are also inherently taxpayer funded welfare in Palmer's opinion, at least. And as the country continues to approach the 2016 election, the author details several conversations that help to explain some of Palmer's beliefs and where some of his interest and support in Trump come from. You know, Luckey said, shaking his head, "I'm getting really concerned about this whole freedom of expression thing." Chen laughed. "At Facebook or like in America?" "Both. All. Everything. Did you know that our supposed allies don't have freedom of expression? Germany doesn't have freedom of speech. The UK doesn't have freedom of speech. The UK claims to have freedom of speech, but they have a giant list of exceptions." "Like what?" "Let me pull it up," Luckey said, searching on his phone. "Okay, here we go. Guarantee of freedom of expression, blah, blah, blah. However, there is a broad sweep of exceptions, including threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behavior intending or likely to cause harassment or alarm or distress or cause a breach of peace. Sending any article which is indecent or grossly offensive with the intent to cause distress, glorifying terrorism, advocating for the abolition of monarchy, decency, obscenity, and defamation. So, everything? Yes. Talk of the First Amendment soon segued into talk about the Second, which Luckey strongly believed for constitutional reasons. Chen, who grew up in Texas, supported it as well. And then eventually the conversation spiraled into the upcoming presidential election. Am I correct to assume that Bernie Sanders is super popular these days over at the Commune? The Commune is where Luckey, his girlfriend, and a handful of other of his friends all live in the same house. Chen asked. Luckey laughed. Yes, you would be correct. And you? Well, Luckey began, I think there's a lot to like about Donald J. Trump. Wait, what? Joe Chen asked, taken aback. Did you say Trump? Yeah, Luckey said, I did. So, once again, what? Luckey wasn't shocked by Chen's tongue-tied reaction. This was actually mild by Silicon Valley standards. Go tell anyone at Facebook or Google or anywhere else that you thought Trump had some fresh ideas, and you'd be lucky to get a response that didn't include an expletive. For that reason, Luckey had hardly told a soul. It wasn't worth the argument. It wasn't worth explaining that of course he didn't think Trump was perfect. Of course he didn't agree with Trump on every issue. It's crazy, Luckey said, referring to the few conversations that he'd had with liberal-leaning colleagues. They all voted for Obama. You obviously didn't vote for him. You were Romney in 2012? Chen asked. No, Gary Johnson. What about 2008? I was 16, Luckey responded. Chen cracked up and Luckey continued. But my point is that just because they voted for Obama, I don't take that to mean that they agree with him 100%. I'm not like, oh, you voted for Obama? I didn't realize you supported civilian drone strikes. Luckey had guessed that Chen would be more open-minded than his colleagues, and he knew that guess had been correct when Chen followed up, not with the usual tisk tisk, but with a genuine ask of why. Give it to me, Chen said. Give me the case for Trump. So now mid-conversation, Palmer, who is known to be early to new ideas and a free thinker, pulls up a Facebook post from March 16th, 2011. So Donald Trump says he is seriously considering running for president in 2012, since he does not think anyone else can save America. He says he'll make his final decision by June. I'm thinking this might be pretty awesome. That's from 2011, Chen asked in disbelief, as in a year before Oculus? That's wild. So what was it you saw back then that made you think that Trump might be a good candidate? Well, Luckey said, I had been a fan of Trump for a long time. I loved Art of the Deal. I took many of the lessons to heart even when starting Oculus. He was a reasonable conservative who had smart beliefs on the drug war. He had a proven history of taking over failed government projects and bringing them to the finish line, ahead of schedule and under budget. He was outspoken against the war in Iraq. Maybe, Chen conceded, but if he were really smart, he would realize that being president sucks. It's a shittier gig than the one he's got. Luckey laughed. That could be. Who knows? Maybe I am blinded by fandom. I've been following the Donald for a long time. The pressure is starting to build, and you can tell Palmer is headed towards an intersection. And simultaneously, there are some worrying things happening at Oculus, which is now a part of Facebook, regarding the decision to make Oculus closed or an open system. While I obviously value your opinions a great deal, Zuckerberg wrote, I also viewed this platform strategy as the whole reason we're investing in VR, so I'm not going to change my views simply because you care a lot. So Palmer is solidly on the side of openness in this conversation, allowing people to mod or play whatever games they want on Oculus, but ultimately is not him who's able to make the call because he's not in charge, and Zuckerberg prefers more of a closed system. And this really encapsulates the danger of losing control of your company. Moving forward, the author devotes significant time to giving background information on a Reddit forum called The Donald, because it is ultimately the grounds for which he is fired from Facebook. And this Reddit forum has exploded in popularity at this point in time and is a grassroots growth story of a Reddit forum of a group of people that believe that Donald Trump is what America needs. And they take it very seriously to combat the narrative of racism and strictly enforce no racism and no anti-Semitism on their Reddit. That the Donald was being covered at all by the media was a tribute to its enormous success. When Malinowski first took over in August 2015, the community had only a couple hundred members. Now, 1 year later, it had become Reddit's second most active community, boasting over 175,000 members. It had grown so powerful that even Trump himself had come to answer questions. And yet, as popular as the Donald had become, and as good as Malinowski had gotten at brushing off fake news about how evil, racist, whatever he and his fellow Trump supporters were, he couldn't shake the feeling that he ought to be doing more. There just had to be something else out there that he could be doing to help nudge his candidate to victory. After months of racking his brain, Malinowski found what he thought might be that something, a simple but clever way to make a difference. But little did he know that the simple idea would have major ramifications for the fate of a company called Oculus. This next interaction is a good example of how partisan the culture in Silicon Valley was at this time, even among Palmer's closest friends and founders at Oculus. "Are you pro-Trump?" Iribe asked Luckey in June via Facebook Messenger. "More anti-Hillary," Luckey replied, "but yes, why? Come on, you're brilliant. I don't take that choice lightly." "It has a lot of thought in it. I'll just stay out of it," Iribe said. "But Trump is bad news." "He could be," Luckey conceded. "I just think Hillary would be worse." And there are quite a few people who agree, including Peter Thiel. Happy to discuss in person. About 20 minutes later, Mitchell came by in person to ask Luckey if he was really planning to vote for Trump. "Yes," Luckey told him. "Dude," Mitchell replied, "I thought you were smarter than that." So things are really starting to unravel in the fall of 2016 as the country becomes increasingly divided over the upcoming election, and it is alluded to in the next paragraph. And I'll read additional passages that give more context, but fundamentally, Palmer donates $10,000 to this organization that was a product of the Reddit group to create a single billboard. "I'm not telling you this as a colleague," the caller told Luckey, "but I'm telling you this as a friend. You need to get an employment attorney." The implication, of course, was that Luckey's job was now in jeopardy. Initially, he found this difficult to believe, that he might be fired for donating $10,000 to a barely 1-week-old nonprofit organization whose mission was to put up billboards in support of the Republican nominee for president. Besides, Luckey reasoned, if his job really was in jeopardy, surely he would have received a heads up from Iribe, who wasn't just in the loop, but was actually a member of Zuckerberg's 10 or so person inner circle M team. So then the Daily Beast and many other quote unquote journalists publish articles saying that Palmer is funding a racist meme machine funded by other trolls, and that if you support Oculus and Facebook, you are supporting white supremacy, and it takes almost no time at all for people to call for him to be fired. And Facebook basically puts him on leave and tells him not to come to work. And to maintain his sanity, Palmer creates a Google Doc and writes the following. "I donated $10,000 to Nimble America. Nimble America put out a billboard. It showed a caricatured portrait of Hillary Clinton alongside the text, 'Too big to jail.' They planned on releasing further billboards. The group and the people who ran it never trolled or harassed anyone, nor did they do anything racist, sexist, homophobic, or anti-Semitic at any point. There was never any kind of internet campaign to malign anyone, or in fact do anything beyond pushing billboards and t-shirts into the real world. The reference to shitposting in real life on their website is a tongue-in-cheek reference to the term that means making internet posts with zero information or worth, which is obviously not the actual goal of any campaign with intent to persuade. A wide variety of media outlets and social media influencers have ignorantly and or maliciously accused myself and Nimble America of trolling, harassment, astroturfing, and copying the Clinton campaign's well-known paid anonymous internet posting efforts through the Correct the Record. I'm popular with internet users on both sides of the aisle. Nimble America handled their launch poorly and lacked organizational skills, but they are just regular guys who don't like Hillary Clinton and do like Donald Trump, a set of opinions shared by roughly half our country. The narrative that is being created and shared by media outlets does not align with reality, but is widely accepted by a public that cares enough to follow it and drive clicks to it, including Facebook employees and former Facebook employees. There are a handful of outlets making fair criticisms related to the credibility of people involved, potential scamming, and the perception that I should have stayed out of things entirely as a public figure. But the vast majority of the ongoing backlash is driven by a false narrative that goes beyond the truth. The unfortunate result is that a handful of press outlets and influencers have managed to construct and push a narrative of several huge lies and countless small lies that are being widely accepted by the greater public, which lacks the interest or ability to do their own research. The public cannot be blamed. The public owes me no benefit of the doubt, and unlike the journalists involved, they have no duty to uncover the truth. It takes an order of magnitude more effort to disprove bullshit than to spread it. Many of the lies being spread seem insignificant on their own, to the point where refuting them all publicly would be an endless task that is easy to portray in a petty light. Giving them cover to distract from their big lies and move the goalposts as far as they can. Unfortunately, hundreds of small lies stacked together and re-reported endlessly are more powerful than most would expect. Tackling this is easier when you can engage people on a human level, but it's impossible when elevated in the minds of many to supervillain status. Meme supervillain. At this point, Palmer still has hope that this will all blow over and that he can go back to the company that he loves, which is his company. Unfortunately, that is not the case, and the media firestorm continues despite there not being any substance to their claims of racism and white supremacy. Back to the book. Amazingly, except of course not amazingly at all, there wasn't a single outlet that published any of these alleged memes. One would think that if Luckey had really been the kingpin of a racist, sexist, anti-Semitic troll army, there would have been articles, slideshows, or even rankings of the most heinous memes that Nimble America created, endorsed, or spread. To this point, exactly 1 week after the Daily Beast's original meme machine piece, Screwta Games, the first developer that had threatened to cancel support for Oculus unless Luckey stepped down, published a series of interesting tweets. We failed to find any evidence backing up the Daily Beast claims that Luckey paid for hate speech, only a lame billboard. So we were misinformed about him financially backing hate speech, which was the issue we had. Since there is no evidence of that so far, we will tentatively resume work. If Screwta Games, a small independent game studio, had reached this conclusion, then surely the media outlets that had reported on Luckey and Nimble America must have realized the same. And yet, whether they did or not, there were no corrections, clarifications, or retractions of the stories that had been printed. Instead, Palmer Luckey equals racist supervillain made for a clickable narrative. Additional inaccurate stories continued to sprout. So Trump actually winning the election did not necessarily help Palmer's case at Facebook, although he was personally happy about it, especially as people in Silicon Valley only became more enraged and now sought to determine how Facebook could have, quote unquote, let this happen, and that they must be failing in their quote unquote mission, which implies that they personally believe they have a role in shaping public opinion and steering people towards the quote unquote right opinion. Back to the book. Regarding the election, Luckey replied, hopefully things will have settled down by then. Yeah, that sounds about right. Unless, well, what if Trump wins? Just a few weeks from the election now, the odds of Trump winning appeared laughably low. So low, in fact, that in anticipation of a Clinton presidency and in fear of further firearm regulations, Luckey spent most of Election Day hanging out and shopping at gun shops in the Orange County area. On election night, Luckey hopped on a plane back to San Francisco. By the time his flight departed, it was clear that the election was going to be much closer than originally thought. Clinton was still the frontrunner, but Trump appeared to be doing better than expected in the battleground states of Ohio and Wisconsin. The trip from Orange County to San Francisco is short, about 90 minutes, but for many, before the flight, it would feel like the shape of their country had changed beneath them. Upon landing, and even before Luckey's phone booted up, he noticed many passengers sobbing around him. It appeared that, holy shit, Trump was actually going to be president. Moments later, Edelman picked up Luckey at the airport, a red Make America Great Again hat waiting for him in the passenger seat, and the two of them celebrated Trump's unlikely victory by grabbing drinks at a spot called Yard House, Edelman throwing back beers and Luckey downing delicious lemonades. So while Palmer and half the country are happy Trump won, the fact that Palmer paid for a single billboard to support the candidate that had just been elected president of the United States, this does not prevent him from being fired from his own company. I need to take this, he said, excusing himself. It was a call from his lawyer. And it was to let him know that Facebook was planning to fire him and not pay any of the money he was scheduled to receive in the coming years, which, due to how the acquisition had been structured in a very backloaded way, was the majority of the money he'd received for selling his company. Luckey was in disbelief. There had to be something that he could do. There had to be a way he could fight back. He told his lawyer that he cared much less about getting the money than he did about remaining with the company, his company. Honestly, Luckey said, I would work there for free. I just want to go back to my company. So Palmer is fired in 2017, not even 5 years after he founded the company and helped bring the first commercially viable VR system into existence. And Oculus employee number one, Chris Dykes, and Palmer's longtime best friend from Mod Retro, sent the following message to Oculus after Palmer was fired. The entire situation surrounding Palmer's embarkment from the company has been the most poorly handled, least transparent internal affair that has ever transpired in the history of Oculus. You can believe me on that, because now that Palmer's gone, I'm the longest Oculus team member. I've been around for everything. We all know how in September last year, a story was written about Palmer that created an enormous PR nightmare, both internally and externally to the company. Palmer soon after went on vacation for an extended period of time. He came back for about 1 week before the ZeniMax trial, then went on vacation again until he was fired. Brendan's post went up 1 day before Palmer's official last day. Palmer was not present on campus on the last day. I've known Palmer for many, many years, and I guarantee you this was not his choice. He would have wanted to come say bye to the people he's been working with for years. Many teams have had going away parties for leaving members. I've been to a few just for the hardware team when interns leave. We had going away parties for interns, but not the founder of the entire company. Are you kidding me? If Oculus values their founder so little, it doesn't inspire a whole lot of faith in me that I'm valued very highly as an employee. So Chris Dykes, after that message, ends up resigning 6 weeks later to join a new startup in stealth mode in Southern California. The stealth mode startup that Dykes was referring to here was Anduril, a new defense tech company founded by Trey Stevens, Matt Grimm, Brian Schimpf, and of course, Joe Chen and Palmer Luckey. So what could have ruined other people's lives or caused them to retreat into bitterness and resentment gave Palmer Luckey the fuel to found one of the most valuable private companies in the world in 2017, the same year he was fired from the company he created. And currently valued at over $60 billion, Anduril is pioneering defense technology. And ironically, the plot to destroy Palmer and fire him for his political beliefs has produced a reality in which he is now a billionaire himself, more famous than he was before, and having a far bigger impact on the world than any of the people responsible for his firing are. That is where I will leave it for now. Deo gratias.